All right, everyone, welcome back. Today's guest is someone that I'm excited to talk to, but I also, in our pre-roll before we were recording, I was talking to how I love their products and what they do, but it's caused me so much issues in my life because I goddamn love donuts so much. When I was working downtown, I used to like stop by the store and like smash so many donuts between meetings. And I'd go to donuts with this like awful sugar high or go to meetings with this awful sugar high over and over again. So with that, Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So for the uninitiated, people who don't know, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Jordan Cash. I'm the founder and dreamer of Cartems Doughnuts. Um, and we've been at it for over 10 years now. And yeah, I've been at the helm since day one,
All right.
making
So
people smile and handing out donuts.
hell yeah, man. So you've already answered a question. Cartems.
Yeah.
So not Cartems.
Yeah, so interesting. So I mean, it's not a real word. So I was working in South Korea a very long time ago, and I had this dream that I owned a donut shop, and the name of the donut shop in the dream was Cartems, and it was this super vivid dream. I woke up and I wrote the name down right away. I still have the little piece of paper I wrote it down on. It was possessive at the time, so there was an apostrophe after the M. And when I decided I was going to start the business, I thought if I keep this apostrophe, people are going to want to know who Cartem is. And that's just, I'm going to have to keep answering that question. So, but the Cartems, the hard T, that's just how I said it the first time. And that's what stuck with me. But a lot of people say Cartems and I don't correct them because I just let people say it however it sounds right to them.
So Patrick, who's sitting across from me today, Patrick and I, we work together, and we also like both like playing punk bands. We've got a lot of history together. And Patrick's also vegan, so like big fan of your donuts. He was like, I think it's Cartems, and I was like, I think it's Cartems. And he's like, I hope it's Cartems. So how disappointed are you, man?
I understand. I
You,
get it. I get it.
that's like a pretty tepid response. I thought you were going to be more disappointed.
I had a feeling it would be cartels.
Okay, good.
But Patrick, did you think that it like, because some people think it's cartums like you're going to cart the donuts off? Was that
No, I thought it was a name. I did.
okay?
Yeah.
I like that idea though, because I have certainly carted off many a donut from. All right, man. So I love that this started when you called yourself a dreamer, like literally a dreamer. Like this came to you in a dream. What were you doing the day before you had this dream that would have led to this?
Great question. I mean, my job there was teaching English. On that fateful night. I mean, I'm a pretty vivid dreamer as it is. The gamut from really great dreams to really really intense ones. And everything in between. I suspect maybe I had some soju that might have happened, but I mean, just another day in South Korea, and but it just unlike it just when I woke up, it was very very clear and profound, and I don't know, it just like it stirred me, and so yeah, that's why I wrote it down.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story about South Korea and me?
Yeah, I love South Korea stories.
How long were you there for?
A year.
Okay. My old band went to South Korea to go play, I think 3 shows,
Yeah.
and it was awesome. Like it was amazing. So we played a show in Seoul at a venue
Mhm.
called Skunk Hell, and there'd been like a feature in the newspaper that this band from North America was coming over, this punk band from North America, and it was, I guess, relatively a big deal that we were coming over because we were one of the first North American bands, and everyone in the band was American except for me, and they made a point of saying like, hey, one of these people is Canadian. And for whatever reason, a bunch of Canadians came to the show. The only embarrassing people at that show were the Canadians, who were like, in between, first they got annihilated, like so wasted, and in between songs were like, Canada. And one dude was wearing a Canadian flag shirt.
Oh
And at the
no.
end of the show, everyone had cleared out, and he was just sitting there throwing up on the ground. I was like, you have not represented my people well. I'm very disappointed. But you, on the
Yeah.
other hand, had this amazing dream while you were there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it was I mean, it was one of many memorable days in South Korea. It was great. I loved it. I really enjoyed South Korea a lot.
All right. So from that day, from the day or the night you had the dream until the founding of Cartems, what
Yeah.
was the path?
Yeah, so gosh, that was early 2000s. Not sure about exact dates, but I went back to Toronto, which is where I'm from.
Mhm.
I worked there for a little bit, and someone that was in my life at the time, she moved out west. And at this point, Cartems is just on the back burner. It never left my mind, but it wasn't front and center and top of mind. I had no sort of inclination that I was going to or even wanted to do that business. She moved out west. I had always thought about moving out west. I love the ocean. I love water. And so being closer to water is I'm always into that. So she moved out there, and I thought, okay, I'm going to move out there and see if I can patch things up. I also wanted to do graduate studies, so I thought the Sauder School of Business would be a good school for me to do graduate studies. And I originally, because the reason I went there is because they had they were the only program at the time that had a sustainability major, so you could major in sustainability in business, which I was really interested in. So I moved out, and the situation with this person didn't work out, but I did end up going to Sauder School of Business, and marketing and entrepreneurship, and those things are what I'm interested in. I love people, and I love building things, and so I distanced myself from accounting and finance, and focused as much as I could wherever possible on marketing and entrepreneurship. And so at Sauder, a lot of the work you do is in groups, and it's a lot of group projects. And I just started to bring up this donut idea. And concurrently, there were donut shops starting to pop up. So like Jelly Modern Donuts, which is in Calgary, like popped up around that time. And they were one of the first. That was them. And there was Glory Hole in Toronto, were two of like the early Canadian, sort of fancy donut shops. In the States, in Portland, Voodoo was already there. Seattle already had Top Pot Donuts. So I started to realize that this idea was actually, it wasn't something completely out of left field. Like, people were already doing it. And I thought, when I finished the program, I thought, if I don't do this, somebody else will. And so I knew the idea was good in the sense that as long as the donuts are good, I think it'll do well. I didn't know if the donuts we were going to make would be well received. I did know that fancy donuts was a thing, though.
I want to give a shout out to Toronto, through Being Cool, which was a vegan bakery out there that sadly no longer exists, but it was one of the first ones that I was aware of. It was like a fully vegan donut shop. And when I was out there for business, like, it was, I was terrible. It was amazing. I was terrible. I would go and spend a ton of money and buy like everything and literally cart them out of the store. And Tammy, who also works for the company, would laugh because she's like, you're kind of like this thin little guy, but you eat like an absolute like disaster. You're just eating like all these donuts, because I love donuts.
Amazing.
All right. So you start Cartems by yourself. Did you get investors? How did it start?
Yeah, so started by myself, researching. I mean, I didn't know how to make a donut. I knew how to eat the donuts. I just didn't know how to make them. So, and it's a very difficult thing to make. So I'm researching. I'm making donuts, in a kitchen, by myself with friends. Friday nights. Hey guys, let's not go out. Let's make some donuts and see what happens. And there's some really funny. Maybe I'll send them to you guys. There's some really fun. I think I still have the OG, like the original first iterations, and looking at those and seeing the progression is pretty funny.
Like the recipes, like the original recipes.
Yeah, no, like I took photos of the donuts and I had them like on my table with but I had candles around them. I like lit candles around the donuts for some reason.
I like this.
Yeah,
you set the mood.
Yeah, yeah, it was very romantic. So yeah, I started myself and trying to do as much research as I can, and eventually got to a place where I thought I need a partner. So I reached out to a friend of mine who was a pastry chef, who was working in at a Caribbean restaurant in Vancouver, Calabash. And so I reached out to him and I was like, dude, I got this idea. I explained the idea, and he said, okay, I'm in. And so him and I officially started the business together. We did get some little bit of money from some family members to get it going, and a little bit of my own. And that's how it started. I will say one thing. One of the earliest experiences, one of the things that I still tell people this all the time, if you're starting a business, is it's so easy to get caught up in doing all the research, which I think is kind of like an excuse to not take the leap. And it's very scary to start a business. And so I found myself doing so much research that didn't really need to get done. What I really needed to do was actually just put a foot in front of the other and actually just start the business, because there's a lot you'll learn as you go. And so, looking back, I wish I had just sort of gone with like, if I'm 85% sure about this, let's say if I'm 85% sure, then let's move forward. Versus, I spent a lot of time doing a ton of research that I didn't actually need to be doing anyways.
Yeah. So, and I love what you just said. I'm a firm believer. When you're starting a business, you should just, like, the best way to begin is to begin. Just go start it, go do it, figure it out as you go along. I know people are like, oh, I don't want to have a soft launch. Well, I'm not telling you to open up a storefront that has nothing in it, but like start your business, like go do something and then figure it out. I also encourage people to not like overthink your competition. Like, I kind of feel like if you overthink your competition, the idea that you might just try and create a slightly better version or a slightly different version of someone else is really high. It's just like, don't worry about who your competition is. Do whatever you're going to do as cool as you possibly can, complete to your vision, and then start your business, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that is, it's very difficult to make one single decision that's going to, like, the business is going along and then suddenly like one decision's not going to, make the business go belly up. You need to make a lot of wrong decisions, or, a lot of things need to happen for it to be that drastic. So, you don't need to dwell on a particular, decision, because just do what feels right, and listen to your gut, and, follow your heart, those kinds of things. And, you're not going to screw everything up. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, totally. Like 100%. So I have a question before we get into like the initial launch. Historically, you loved donuts, or you like donuts. Like, were you like, did you love donuts, or were you like, yeah, donuts are good?
My number one sweet is actually the cookie. I'm a cookie fiend. Very particular about my cookies. I like very specific ones. So, but for me, donuts, I like sweets. I like baked things a lot. Donuts do have a little bit of a nostalgic thing for me, because my father and I, when I was young, after dinner, he'd say, hey, Joy, let's go get some D's, he would call them. And, we'd go to Tim Hortons when they actually made the donuts there. And so I have a little bit of like a nostalgic father-son bond thing with them, but they are one of many sweet things that I like to eat. Most of which are like baked or fried goods, because those are that's what I like the most.
That's the good stuff. All right, what's your go-to cookie when you say you're very particular?
Yeah, so there are two right now. So the snickerdoodle is definitely at the top of my list right now. I make a mean snickerdoodle. The other one that is my all-time is just oatmeal cookie. I don't want any raisins. I don't want nuts. I don't want chocolate. I just want a like plain oatmeal cookie. That's my like all-time favorite.
You like your cookies warm or cold?
I like my cookies warm or at room temperature. They should have a little bit of crisp on the outside edge, but everything else should be soft. But I do like a little bit of crisp on the outside.
Is a wagon wheel a cookie or something else?
It's something else.
Like, what is it though?
I'm not sure. I mean, here's a question. What's a donut? If you actually think about it, what is a donut? What things constitute a donut? Because it doesn't have to be sweet. It doesn't have to be circular. I mean, there are so many versions of it that it's like, what is it? Is it fried dough and that's it?
Is it considered a pastry?
I don't think so. But you know what I mean? Like, what actually is, like, how do you define donut?
Can I take this even further?
Yeah.
Is cheesecake a cake or a pie?
Ooh. Yeah. And I love cheesecake.
Oh, forget about it.
That's
Cheesecake is good.
yeah.
I feel like we've got a lot of like, I think of the wagon wheel. It's like, what is a wagon wheel? Like, it's kind of like a cookie. It's kind of not like a cookie. Like,
Yeah.
what is it? Is it go into the kind of those, what are those 7-Eleven things that people get? Like they're on the shelf or whatever. Yeah, never mind.
Like the
It
Joe
goes,
Louis?
yeah, like does it go into like that category of like kind of, those like weird pastries you can get at a 7-Eleven that are going to survive like a nuclear war? Like, what is it?
I think so.
Like a Twinkie? What's a Twinkie?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. We're getting far off, but I appreciate your candidness. So donuts, the reason I'm asking this is like, if you think about an industry, any industry, it could be um it could have people that are trying to like guard its gates. Basically, it's like, no, like this is our thing. So when you were first getting involved in it and you saw this like opening in the market, you liked sweet things, but it was more like, oh, like, hey, Vancouver actually could you do this, and if I don't do it, someone else is going to. Was there ever any pushback from any of the people who would kind of be the gatekeepers of the industry?
You mean people that are in the donut game pushing
Yeah,
back on us?
yeah, like kind of like, who the hell are you to open up this shop?
No.
And never had anything like that.
No, I mean, interestingly enough, so Lee's Donuts on Granville Island.
Mhm.
If you go there, there's glass where you can see inside of their kitchen. And so when I was in my sort of let me do my research phase, I would go down there and I had my headphones in and I had and I kind of thought I was making it look like I was making a phone call, but what I was actually doing was voice recording all of their equipment, every move they made, everything they were doing. But I was doing it like a lot. Like I just kept going to see what they were doing. At one point, Elvin, who was the head baker there, he came out and he was like, he came up to me aggressively, like, what are you doing? Like, you're always here. and I mean, I'm not a good liar. I don't like lying. So I just told him what I was doing. And he was like, oh, cool. Okay. Let me just go open the windows so that if you have questions, you can just ask me. And he was like, not a gatekeeper at all. He was more like, welcomed me with open arms and opened the gate. And it's like,
Oh
come on
yeah,
in, and
that's
happy to share the
amazing.
knowledge. Yeah. I mean, shout out to Alvin. He was great. I mean, he was, instrumental in helping me along the way in the early stages.
That's amazing. All right, so
Yeah.
let's go to like actually launching the space. So I would imagine up to then you'd never like owned or operated or ran a retail space before, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you
Never.
figure all that?
Yeah. So hadn't owned, operated a retail space. We were looking for a space and, we didn't have a ton of money. And so what we ended up doing, which was, we did it for a number of reasons. One was there wasn't a good space that worked for us. What we ended up doing was just setting up in a commissary kitchen. So
Mm.
commissary is a shared kitchen facility where you share equipment. You can bring something of your own there if you want, but typically everybody's sharing the equipment that's there and you just sort of pay rent. And it's that way the capital expenditure at the start is so much lower. I had quite a lot of friends who worked in various businesses downtown from the MBA program.
Mhm.
And so I sort of leaned on them and said, I'm going to be starting this in this little commissary kitchen. Can I count on you all to, order donuts in bulk? We'll deliver them to you. And that way it was lower risk. I could do that and look for the right location. And as long as the branding and the box looked good, we're rolling and, we're getting some deliveries, we're generating some interest and, the social media stuff is happening. And so that's how we started it. And that gave me some time to understand more about brick and mortar locations. And then what ended up happening was our insurance agent was one of his other clients was a restaurateur in Gastown. And he so happened to have this little 100 square foot spot at Carroll and Hastings in Vancouver that he wasn't using. He just used the back as his office, and the front of it was, vacant. And so I met up with him, and we basically just sort of had a handshake deal of, you can use the front of this space, and this is what I'll charge you. And that ended up being our first brick and mortar, which was already set up, and we didn't have to do very much except deliver donuts to our little shop there from the commissary. And through that, I think that's how I kind of started to learn about what we needed, how much space did we need. And that allowed us a little bit of it gave us time having this little pop-up. And then we stumbled on the Pender location, like a year and a half, 2 years after we started that little pop-up. It got busy, so busy that there was just no time to look for spaces. So there's a little period there where all we did was make donuts.
So from its outset, so when you really like, no, we're going to do this, from its outset, were you making your living from this, or did you have to have side jobs?
No, this was it.
Okay. And was it just you doing that, or was it you and your partner both all in?
Yeah, it was my partner and I. Rajesh is his name, but he goes by Rags.
Mm-hmm.
So Rags and I were, wake up in the morning, make the donuts.
Uh-huh.
Then I load the donuts we had a little station wagon. We'd load the donuts into the station wagon with like a baker's rack, like Jimmy rigged into the back of it. I take that to the pop-up. Then I work the shop for the day. Then I go back to the kitchen, and then we have to pre-batch because we make everything from scratch. So you have to weigh out all of your wet and dry ingredients ahead of time. So then I go back to the kitchen, get everything ready for the next day, go to bed, do it all over again.
And how many days a week were you doing this?
6 days a week. And then, on the end of the fifth day, we would go to this one particular spot on Commercial Drive to have beers. And then on Sundays, we would just do nothing.
Okay. So how long till you brought on your first like real deal employee who was like, this is someone that we are going to pay solely to work here?
Yeah, it took us about, I want to say 8 months before we because initially, you're just putting out these little fires and figuring out your cadence, and we've never done this before. So we're making mistakes as we're going and figuring out what we need to do when. And we kind of hit our stride, 6 or 7 months in. And in the 8th month, we hired one person to work in the kitchen and then another person to work at the shop. Things were starting to pick up at the shop. It was getting a lot busier, and one person, you just couldn't handle it. And so about 8 months in, we had one person in the kitchen and one at the shop, and that gave us a little bit more time to catch our breath.
Yeah. So what do you do with that time when you're catching your breath? Because I know from starting my own small business, it's like you hire people and people are like, oh, it's amazing. You've got people doing stuff for you. You're like, oh my God. But I actually have to do 10 times more stuff now as a result. So what were you doing with that time now that you'd offloaded that onto other people, where were you putting your sights?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I wasn't helping with something that needed fixing or addressing with our new staff members, I was looking a lot at that point at, okay, what's our next step? Where are we going to find a location? We need a brick and mortar. We've got to kind of move out of this commissary and pop-up situation. So doing a lot of that. I was still handling all the social media. So that took up quite a bit of time as well. And then lastly, I was, we were running at like 110%. And it was like, wait, are we doing well or not? Like, let's how are we actually doing here? Like, okay, I can see in my bank account, there are numbers there, but like, how are we actually doing? So I took a lot of time to sort of step away and see how were things running and where could we get better. And like I said, also it was, trying to find a location.
How did you manage your mental health, but also your relationship with Rags?
So Rags and I were always really tight. We sort of complemented each other in a lot of ways. So Rags has a kitchen background. So when we would get into the weeds, he was the sort of calm in the storm, because he knew that that's what our other, like we had 2 other staff members, and that's what they needed to see was calm. I do not have a kitchen background. I'm a very competitive person. And so when things get intense, my default switch is to get intense. And so I stopped talking, and I get really serious. And he's like, bro, like you can't You can't do that. So, and that's just an example of how we complemented each other. So him and I, most of the time we're quite good. To answer your first question about my mental health, yeah, I think at the time I was not really addressing it at all, and just sort of doing what I tend to do, and it's not good, but I just keep pushing. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but that's, I think, what I do a lot of the time is just keep going and try to sort of suppress, issues that I was having. But it sort of showed itself. There were a number of nights where I would come home and like I'd just cry, and like sob, because just all this emotion that I was storing in me, or I'd watch like an emotional video and just be like crying uncontrollably about like, a dog that's getting sailors. Like, so I don't think I did a good job, but when the tears came, I let them flow.
Yeah. Do you mind if I share something about my small business?
Not at all.
So that kind of like give until gone mentality, like this is going to work no matter what. Like I suffer from that and suffer and also benefit from it, because there is a benefit that like, I've been able to like really, we as a company have been able to like put a real mark in the industry that we're in, which is super competitive. There's like a bazillion coaching companies, but we're able to put a real mark on there. But also that was me like working 16-hour days, like sacrificing my personal time, like crazy levels of like hard work, anxiety, and all these. And the way that I would do it is I'd push everything down. And then I hit a point where it's like give until gone becomes gone. And I was like, oh yeah, things are gone right now. And I actually had to like go to therapy for a long time to kind of learn how to like balance having a business, balance having a social life, balance like being in a relationship. And it's funny because like you can be a successful business and also like totally destroy yourself, like ruin your life. And I think everyone knows that, but I'd say just say from a guy who's like really good at making things happen, I definitely hit a point where I was like, oh, this is something that has legs. It's going to be a really cool thing. And I want it to be around, and I want people in the business to feel like I'm not going to burn myself out. It's a hard balance, man. And so I was having those moments where I was like, oh my God, this song is so sad. It's like, I'm listening to like a Ramon song and I'm like crying. Oh my God. It's like a real thing. And that's why I asked, because like, I know that feeling of being like, oh no, this is going to work without a doubt, but it takes a toll on you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I don't know why this is, but I think that there's this default, you just sort of default to, well, I'm the leader of the business, and so like this is how it's supposed to be or something. And like, and I've got to shoulder this load. And that's not the case. But I think that oftentimes people just sort of default to that notion. And it's okay to be vulnerable and ask for help, and it's for the betterment of yourself and all of those people around you.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And also sometimes there are times where it is on your shoulders, and you do ask for help, and people only help in the way that they think they know how to help. It's a weird thing being a leader, because like when we talk about being vulnerable, it's like it sounds good, and I like talking about being vulnerable, but also there's times where you're like, oh, I just told everyone how I could help and nobody's doing the things that I need them to do. I guess I have to go back to my default setting. And like, there's times where I'll realize something that's happening in the business, and I'll just be like, oh shit, like now I have to wade in on this. And it sucks because it feels like the weight of the world is on you, but you're also that person and you got to do it. And being vulnerable is not necessarily going to help in that moment, because being vulnerable might cause you to like wig out and like say something that you totally regret. So other times does require clamping down. And the reason I'm hitting on this is like, I love the idea of being vulnerable. And I think when you surround yourself with the right people, you totally can. And the burden of leadership is like a real thing. And there are times that even if you're vulnerable, you still feel like the weight of the world is all on your shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah. I fully agree. And I think it is, worth reminding oneself when you are the leader of a business that sometimes like this is what you signed up for. Like, it will be hard sometimes, and you will be the one that has to shoulder a lot of the load. And that's, it's like, and it's good to remind yourself, like, that's what being a leader is like. Yeah, it is hard sometimes.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's go back to the donut story. So Cartems first came on my radar because I am vegan. And growing up, I've been vegan for quite a long time, and I had periods where I was just vegetarian. I had periods where I ate meat, but largely for like a very long time, I've been vegan. And I have what I call 1993 vegan, and then 1997 vegan, which is in 1997 when I first became vegan, or maybe it was like 96, whenever it was. There was all these things that you could have, like ice cream bars and like whatever, and you'd eat it and you'd be like, oh, this is so good. This is just as good as ice cream. Lie, total lie. We're all like delusional, like a lot. Just and you could see like people are like, I know this tastes terrible, but I'm just going to pretend it's good, and I need you to pretend that as well. Like we're all in agreement that we're going to pretend. And like 1997 veganism was horrendous. Like it was, you could not have anything good, sweet stuff that was good. But then, throughout the years, so like now Monica and I, who's my partner, like we'll joke, we'll be like, like what year is this? We'll be like, oh, it's like 2000. This is a 2010 donut, or like, oh, this is like a 2015. Because you could feel these moments when things shifted. Cartems, I hear that you guys have vegan donuts and gluten-free donuts, and that you really actually hit like these kind of like what I guess you'd call at that time specialty markets. And I went and I was skeptical. I was like, they look good. I don't know about this. And I got one. I was like, oh, I'll have 3 more. These are delicious. Like they were real deal. They were the first vegan raised donut I ever had that was actually good outside of Voodoo Donuts in Seattle.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Wow. I appreciate that. So tell us about the journey of getting to that though. So starting with normal donuts that were like, cool. They were like very fancy donuts to then branching out to doing things like gluten-free or vegan.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the beginning, sourcing close to home, being aware of, the impact that we all have on things around us, and supporting our community and the people that are coming into the shops. All of those things were really important to us. And very early on, we had people coming in and saying, do you have vegan donuts? Do you have gluten-free donuts? And our answer was no. And I kept saying to Rex, I was like, bro, I think we gotta make these. The people are asking, and we have to do it. And he's like, okay, let's do it. And so the original offering, the original vegan and gluten-free donut was a combination. We did both in one donut. And it was baked, and immediately people were like, this is actually like quite good. And between Rags and I, we really do, sometimes to a fault, but we will say yes a lot. And so people were asking for these things, and we gave it to them. And many years later, people kept asking, like, can you do, we'd have a monthly special, right? And they would say like, well, is there a vegan option? Is there a gluten-free option? And we do it on that different dough. But what we really wanted to do, and we were trying in the background, was how do we make vegan dough? Because we were going through a lot of dairy, and I'm not vegan. I've been vegetarian at different times, and and I'm trying to be conscious of how much meat I'm eating, but we were going through a lot of dairy, and it was starting to sort of weigh on me that a little bit of a conflict of like, well, if we really do care, are we doing all we can? And I said to Rags, I said, bro, if we can make this donut and make it where it's you couldn't even tell the difference, then we should do it. And so that started what was, it probably took us I would say for the yeast dough, we were probably doing that for well over a year before we got to a place where we thought, okay, like this is where we need it to be. And we still have to iterate it to this day. Environmental impacts have changed a lot of things in flour composition and like where the flour, like, we get it from Anita's in Chilliwack, but the floods there have had big impacts on them and temperatures and all these things. So we're still iterating it, but it took us almost, it was over a year, maybe a year and a half or so before the yeast donut was vegan. Yeah. And then we thought, well, why don't we try and make the cake dough vegan, which is difficult because cake dough, I mean, yeast dough, so it's bread, right? It's fried bread, and bread is very often vegan. It's just not called, it doesn't say vegan, but bread is very, very often vegan because it doesn't need an animal product in it at all to be incredible. Whereas cake dough really is traditionally not vegan, and there is not a lot out there in terms of recipes for cake dough that are vegan. So we were really kind of flying, in uncharted waters at that point, or uncharted air, I guess, if we're flying. But that took a long time, and we got to a point where, multiple people, eyes closed. We had the vegan one and the non-vegan, and no one could tell the difference. And that's when you're like, okay, we're like, everything we do is vegan. And so, now, save for a few donuts where, we've, as much as we've tried, if there's some things that if you do it vegan, it really would change the flavor that we're after. And so there's a couple of things we do that with fillings or toppings that exclude that particular donut from being vegan. But I mean, 95% of what we do now is vegan.
Yeah. And it's been so cool to watch from the sidelines with this, and like cool because I love donuts, but we went from having no options or options that were literally dog shit, like the worst, absolute garbage. Like I hated it. And we went from that to, okay, once a year I get to go down to Voodoo Donuts. That's incredible. It's so good. To, whoa, like Cartems has got vegan donuts. To, oh my gosh. And I might be getting the timeline wrong here, but what's the one in Seattle, the cake one?
Top Pot?
Not Top Pot. Hold on a second. I gotta Google this because they did a great, it's all vegan.
I'll tell you a story anecdotally while you're doing that. I went down to
Mighty-O Donuts.
Oh yeah. I know Mighty-O. Yeah.
So go ahead, please.
We so my partner is in the ice cream business, and so we all went to New York on a little bit of a journey to taste ice cream and donuts, and this was 6 years ago or so. And similar to your story, we went to a few spots that had vegan and gluten-free products, donuts. And so at this point, I was already a few days into the trip, and my teeth legit were actually, and I've never had this in my life, where my teeth were hurting. It hurt to chew sugar because I'd eaten so many sweets, which made me really I thought, I said, if this donut isn't delicious, I'm not going to finish it. And there were a number of spots I went to. I was like, this is just not good. And I thought, I know we can do better than this. Like the vegan and gluten-free options were just really not good. And we've come a long way.
Totally. Well, there were places. Oh, and sorry. So Mighty-O Donuts, they had great vegan cake donuts. And now I think they've gone to yeast donuts as well. And then finally, we're in modern times where Doughnuts in Portland is one of the greatest, all vegan, totally amazing.
They're very good.
Yeah. Two amazing people. Carly, who's a friend of the show. Shout out to Doughnuts. I just love that it went from no, this is not a thing. Vegan donuts are not a thing, or the worst possible version, to these little spots to it's now just the norm. And the interesting thing too is there were these unintentionally vegan donuts, like Ronald's in Las Vegas, and there's some in Southern California that was they weren't vegan because they set out to do it. It was just because, as you said, they were just fried bread that they were oh yeah, we just won't put dairy in this, and you had to find it out. But now we're in this time where it's I can just go to Cartems or most cities and go and have not just a vegan donut, but an unreal, better than any donut I've ever had donut. And that to me is such a cool thing of people who are running the business. So for example, where you're you're not vegetarian, you're not vegan, you're just oh, this is what our audience wants. Rather than getting our audience to conform to us, we're actually going to reach out to new audiences and try and create that relationship and do a really good job of it. That to me is such a cool business story.
Yeah, totally. And it's also, I mean, we still get this where people come in and they eat the donuts, and then somehow they find out, maybe somebody in line says oh, where are your vegan options? And we're all of this. And those people like, that was vegan, and like, and they're just like, what? That was so good. Like, what are you talking about? And like, yeah, dude, that's vegan, man. Yeah,
Really.
it still happens.
You also said something earlier that I always joke about, Monica and I joke about a lot, that people often lump gluten-free and vegan together. And it's like, if I go to a restaurant, I'm like, oh, like what's vegan on the menu? They're like, oh, we don't have anything vegan, but we have something gluten-free. And I'm like, I mean, anyone listening who like, please, like, it's great to have something that's vegan and gluten-free. That's great. But like vegan is vegan, gluten-free is gluten-free. They're separate things that can cross over, as in your case is fantastic.
Yeah.
But like, anyways, going back to your story, I just think it's so cool that you thought about your audience and you made that move, and you're also thinking about the environmental impact. So at this point, Cartems is just bumping along. When did you start expanding into multiple stores, and how did that happen?
So yeah, Pender's open, and we're going along, and shortly after opening, a similar sort of thing. Once we found our groove, 6 months in or so, now we've got a bunch of staff, and things are running smoothly. Everybody's happy. We reached out to some real estate brokers to say, okay, well, we have this kitchen, and we do all our production in this kitchen. We need another spot to service, because we had enough capacity in this kitchen to make enough donuts for that spot and another one, and more than that. So, it took us probably, I want to say it was just over a year before we landed on the Main Street location. And we had looked at locations, multiple locations. Nothing seemed to really fit. And then we found the Main Street location, and saw that spot right on a corner. I was like, yeah, this is perfect. So yeah, that was between a year and 2 years, somewhere in there is when we found it. And then, so started the process of, we've got to take everything out, and then what is it going to look like? What are we going to do in here? And, trying to do that as economically as possible, while still making it, beautiful, and a place that people want to sit down and spend time in. Yeah, did most of the work in both the Pender and Main Street shops ourselves.
Something that stands out to me about Cartems is that kind of being just ahead of the thing that's going to happen. So when you were like, hey, fancy donuts are going to be a thing. If we don't do it, someone in Vancouver is going to do it. You do it. You've got that spot in Pender where it's like, if you go a little bit one way, you're in straight business. You go a little bit another way, you're in an area it's got some challenges. And you started a business there that kind of like was able to really serve all different communities in this really interesting kind of crossroads that I think
totally
is really beautiful. But then you start the one on Main Street before Main Street became what it's become now, like Mount Pleasant, and it's such a revitalized, super cool area. And you're basically like, when I give people directions, like, go to Cartems, that's where things start getting cool, and then walk south from there. It's kind of become the like almost like a gateway, and the building's beautiful. What's that restaurant? The Whip that was there forever. Yeah, like the Whip has been there forever. That's just an amazing spot. But it is really kind of like the beginning of that whole Main Street thing. But when you started the store, it wasn't that. It was like you had to have vision to know what Main Street was going to become.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there's certainly a degree of luck involved. But so the Pender spot made a lot of sense, because like you said, it's sort of, I always call it crosstown, because you're not in Gastown, but you're not downtown, but you're kind of close enough to both. And the Telus building, I believe at that time they'd already broken ground for the Telus building, which is just up the street from us. And so my inclination was that the core of downtown would start to come that way. More offices, more law firms starting to move east towards us. Because Telus is such a like a focal point. It's such a huge building. And so, also there was a little bit of luck, but also that spot was more affordable, right? Like we were paying a lot less there than just, say a block west of us. So there was that factor as well. And Main Street, I lived at Main and 15th. So I had been there for a long time. And so I had a really good feel for that area. And you're absolutely right that we are sort of right at the edge. Although, with all the development that's happening down at the seawall, everything's kind of like converging. And now with all these high rises going up all around us, I think that the edge is starting to change. But I always felt good about that Main Street spot because I felt like I knew that community reasonably well. I'd spent a lot of time there, close to Main and Broadway. I always thought that just all the traffic driving that way was kind of cool. We'd get some visibility that way. And then, yeah, we also got lucky because like the amount of development that's happening there now is unbelievable. And, we're in a heritage building, so it's not coming down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we opened up, on Broadway, which was probably 3 years after that. And that was a spot, looking back, it was a mistake, opening up there. I had high hopes for that area, sort of revitalizing itself. It's got a nice community feel there, but it just hasn't really turned the corner. And I loved that space. It was my favorite shop. I loved working there. The people that came, we had such solid repeat business there. But we didn't, my takeaway from that is we didn't have the density to sustain the business there. We need to move a lot of product to make a space make sense. And there just wasn't the density there. There was a real community aspect there, but the pandemic hit and, things got rough and we had to make some tough decisions, and we ended up jettisoning that spot and letting somebody else take it over.
Yeah. So much of the story here has to do with like, it's that combination of like, literally like dreaming something or just kind of having vision, but also like smart business decisions and kind of being like, hey, I think this is going to happen based on the following factors. So one of the things I know, Spencer, and you talked about in the pre-call was leading with your heart. Mm-hmm. And let's focus on not the business side of it, but the heart side of it. Like, why, from your perspective, should leaders like listen to their heart?
I think, as a business leader, you're faced with decisions every day. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, at some point you're going to look back on the things that you did, and you're going to weigh decisions after you've made them based on what's happened. And for me, the thing that allowed me to rest my head easy and be okay with the things that I've done is if I trust myself and if I listen to my heart, I can't really make a wrong decision. Mm-hmm. And it's not really about right or wrong. It's making the best possible decision you can. And for me, the way to do that is to, look internally and listen to your heart. Mm-hmm. and let your heart guide you, because ultimately that's going to be a good decision. It may not work out, but it's going to be a good decision. So for me, it was a way for me to make decisions and be comfortable with whatever the outcome was, as long as I followed my heart.
Oh yeah. So as Cartems is growing, and you did touch on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear more about the leadership side. Like, what was the biggest challenge for you as Cartems grew and established more locations? Like, I know we've talked a bit about the business side where it's like, that location didn't work out. And that was a beautiful, beautiful location. But I'd love to hear about like the leadership side of it. What was a big challenge for you as the company scaled and grew?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, when you're running a business and everybody's under one roof, things like your mission, your vision, and your values don't necessarily need to be made explicit, because everybody's just together and energy is shared and purpose and drive is all kind of, you're feeding off of one another. And so when we first started, those types of things weren't even on my radar, because it just didn't need to be. Everybody felt the energy and felt driven, and we all kind of were on the same page without it necessarily being made explicit. And then we opened up Main Street, and so now you have effectively these two silos, right? And unless people are friends, there's a very good chance that they're not going to like spend time outside of work talking with one another. And so, the challenge started there, where people started to not really be sure why they were showing up, and why is it that they what are they doing this for? Like, what are we fighting for? What's the mission of the company, and what's the purpose? And people were just showing up to work. And it was a little bit noticeable with 2 locations, but once we had the third really tipped the scales, where now we've got this third silo, and people really just didn't really understand that, because it wasn't, nobody told them, like, what's the mission of the company, what's the purpose. Otherwise, I'm just showing up to sell donuts and ask people what they would like, with their coffee. And so we started to, as I spoke with staff, and we all sort of started to get this feeling that people didn't know why they were there, and like, how are we all connected, and we weren't making that clear. So that was a very big challenge for us, and something that we had to address. And I would say that communication in general became very difficult with 3 locations, because it's easy to forget that people have questions, and if you're not asking them how they're doing, I think my feeling was always, if I'm not checking in on people, they're not going to be asking questions. And so the lines of communication started to get a little bit broken, where we weren't communicating enough with our leaders at each of the shops, and they weren't then obviously communicating anything down. And so we had to do a lot of work, myself included, a lot of work for myself, just in terms of how to make goals explicit, how to make the mission and the vision, the values of the company, how do we live that, and how does that impact each person, and whatever it is they do each day, so that we're all connected. And so that became a really, really big challenge for us as we grew, and something that was really important to me. I don't think that all businesses necessarily care about things like that, and to each their own, but for me and for us, like, that was a really big part of what we were doing.
Yeah. So how did you learn to stretch your communication style? So like, I know over communication is super important to you, but like,
Yeah,
it's kind of like vulnerability. Like, these are things that a lot of leaders say. And it's like, oh, over communicate. I had a boss who was like, over communicate. That's my jerk voice. Over communication is like so important. It's like, dude, you're the worst. Like, shut up. Like, I don't even want to hear you talk. You're the worst. And he would want you to over communicate, but would be like the worst about his communication. So things like over communication or like vulnerability, these are like kind of these tropes that leaders talk about, but there's a big difference between people who talk it and people who walk it. And I know you walk it. So how did you actually get good at that?
Yeah. So the way that I did that was, it was how I showed up each day at the shops, and my goal or my intention, in order to increase communication and create some dialogue, was, and I had gone from, I was in this place where I would say to people, hey, how are you doing? How was your weekend? Like the usual questions. And that was it. That's all I would say to our staff and to our team. And I had to flip that, and I had to regain their trust, so that they would communicate with me, and vice versa. Because at that point, they knew what I was going to say, and I had to sort of change that script. And so what I did in order to increase communication between myself and the rest of the team was, before I went into the shops, and I always had I'd set out my weekly schedule of, like, I'm going to go to this shop on this day, or these 2 shops on this day. So I try to see as many people as I could. And I would go in, and I would have a real like check-in with all of the staff. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything that needs addressing? Like these types of questions, which for the first little while, nobody would say anything to me, because they just don't think that this is necessarily anything that's actually real. They just like, oh, okay, it's just, so the thing for me in terms of communication becoming more important was, I was super persistent with doing this, to the point where they're like, okay, yeah, like I am going to tell him these things now. And so what happened from that point was that the staff were now much more open about things that needed addressing. We ended up also, the leaders of the company, we started sending out information more frequently, even if we didn't think somebody needed to know that information. Even something as simple as CCing somebody on an email, we would do those things, not necessarily that they needed to chime in, but that they knew what was going on, so that they had as much information as possible that they could then use as well. And I would say the last thing about communication and just generally speaking is, and this is sort of to your point about your former boss, is when you say you're going to do something, or if something needs addressing, you have to address it. Like if you don't, you have to do it. There's no room for error there, and you have to make sure you follow through, because people notice those things.
Totally, man. All right, I'm going to ask you two tough questions about leadership, about your leadership. What's one piece of feedback that you've gotten about your leadership style that was tough to hear, but you've been effective in changing? Like, so you got it, it was difficult, but you've done the work that helped you effectively change it.
Yeah, it's definitely that I am not as good at, and it's still not as good as I'd like to be at having hard, honest conversations with people. When people are doing well, I'm perfectly fine and capable of applauding them and really telling them what a great job they did. But when it comes to you're not doing a good enough job, I know you're capable of better, I believe in you, those types of things. I didn't do that as much as I would have liked in this sort of formative years of the company. Giving people half of the feedback that I'd like to give them, versus actually telling them all the real things, and in a heartfelt way, not like being a jerk about it, but at the same time, like when you're not doing something and somebody believes you can do better, you have to tell them. And so that was really hard for me to hear. Yeah, my other partner, Krista, she was the one that told me that, and I was like, yeah, you're right. And that's a lot of my past is, I wasn't, my parents and I, didn't talk a ton. And so I think a lot of it sort of stems from that. But it's still something I'm working on, in not only in business, but in life, like just having those real conversations. It's hard sometimes.
Yeah, it totally is, man. All right. Next hard question. What's something that you've learned about yourself being a leader that you were shocked to learn? And it could be something like you were like shocked and totally delighted and felt really good about it, or shocked where you're like, ooh, I don't like that about myself. And something that's specific because you were leading and building a business that maybe you wouldn't have learned about yourself otherwise.
I mean, so the thing and that still shocks me is that like people are willing to step to the plate with me and like work on this thing that I dreamt. Like that shocks me, that like people care enough to do those things, and stand alongside me. I don't consider myself to be a leader. And when I've had Krista tell me multiple times, like she's like, people are here because they believe in you. And like I find that shocking to hear a lot of the time. And in my life, I've always been a hard worker. Even I've played basketball my whole life, and you ask anybody who knows me, they will tell you that, oh yeah, Jordan, he'll die for the ball, he'll go get the rebounds, and I'm running up and down the court like I work. And so it still shocks me, and makes me feel good, and also very thankful that there are people that are willing to stand alongside me, and work on this thing and build this thing where we do put people first, and that's something that other people believe in too.
Oh yeah, I love that. So what's some advice, like something that you would say to yourself now, like current state you, that you would advice or words of wisdom that you'd give to yourself in year one of the business?
There's two. One is get a good lawyer and make sure all of the like legal stuff, all of that is crystal clear. Like spend the money, make sure the business is protected, make sure every partner, everything, all of those things, get it done early, and hire a good accountant really early. Those are like the two, like, sort of black and white business things. And then something more on the, the ethereal, personal side is, giving gratitude and taking time yourself personally, and also with the people around you that are in the trenches with you, is taking time to be grateful for the good things that you do. Because when you run a business, so often you're just focused on what's the next fire, what's the next thing I have to deal with, take care of, and all of these like things that don't evoke necessarily positive emotions. but meanwhile, if you actually stop and you step back, you can really realize that there's lots of good that you're doing every day.
Mhm.
And it's so easy to get stuck in the muck and the mire of all these little things that are going on, and you don't take the time to say, wow, look at the good that we're doing, and let's acknowledge that as well. And so I would tell myself 1 year in to, each day think of one great thing that's happened, and make sure you like feel that, and do it every day.
Yeah, I love that. Could I share with you a little bit of my philosophy about talent development?
Yeah.
Um, so when I look at, people talk about coaching pretty loosely, like, oh, I love coaching, or I want to be a good coach, or any of these things. I like to break it down to instruction, influencing, and then in the middle is coaching. So it's almost like there's like a spectrum, where instruction is like you're just teaching someone how to do something, and you get them to do it like over and over and over again. You give them feedback, but you're really saying like, this is how you do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas influencing would be, this is how you think about something. So it's like you're challenging their pre-existing thinking, you're stretching their thinking, you're giving them new things to consider. And then coaching would be the middle ground between the two, where you're doing a bit of both. And I'd use like a driving instructor as an example. So a driving instructor could just show someone the mechanics of how to drive a car, get it on a
Mm-hmm.
highway, like obey the laws, like do that, just do it over and over again. Here you go. Or a driving instructor could teach someone about like the philosophy of being a good steward of the road, like being a good community member of the road, how to like give people compassion if they're driving like jerks, how to like not get caught up in road rage. And you could do the combination where you're showing someone how to drive, but also how to think about driving. That's like, I think like a great driving instructor. So with that framework that I just told you about, which might be totally separate of how you view things, if you think about like how you've helped develop people and grow people up through the organization, how have you learned how to do that, and like what's your style of how you do that?
Wow, it's a big question.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, developing talent, and how I do that. I think part of it. It's a hard question because part of me is like, I don't know. I just try and show up and bring energy. But when I really think about it, one of the things that has always been true, um, for us, and something that we've always lived, is we're trying to make people's days better. That's the whole point of Cartems. When you're walking down the street and you see somebody with their head up walking towards you, and you smile and say hello, I guarantee you may not even notice it, but like the next 5 steps at least in your walk are going to be a little bit lighter and a little bit better because you've exchanged something with somebody. And that, we have a handbook, and that's something that's in there because I believe that. And I think that, part of the reason we opened Cartems is, I mean, yes, I had this dream, but the whole point of the shop is we're using donuts as a vehicle to make somebody's day better. And so, when it comes to developing talent, I think it's for me, in terms of, if we're selling a donut, it's getting people to understand they're not selling a donut. They're selling making somebody's day better, making somebody smile. And that means a lot more to someone and goes a lot longer, in terms of impacting them when they step into the shop. The other thing I would say to that is that when it comes to developing talent, or just trying to get the most out of people, is, I always tell people, if you want to feel good about yourself, do things for other people. And that seems to percolate throughout the company, where whether you're selling a donut and you're trying to help this person that's standing there in front of you, or you're in the kitchen and somebody needs help with something, and you jump into glazing, or jump into sprinkling something, and like myself included, like getting into the dish pit. And I think that the way those things have manifested themselves is a culture where people do help one another, where we are doing more than just saying, what donut can I get you? um, the other thing I would add to that is we would have a lot of meetings where we talked about leadership, and we had books that we all were reading, and we would do, each person, that was a manager, had to do a report on a book, and I think those things also helped a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think just living that idea of doing for others, and that we are trying to make people's days better. That was actually our original, like, slogan, was making people's days better since, and then it was like when we started the company, but then it went to Smiles, Conversations, and Donuts.
I love that. So there's someone who worked at Cartems. I can't remember their name, but they used to work at, I think it was like Choices or something, and just like would ring people through. And when I went to Cartems one day, they started working there, and I'd always remember this person from Choice because it was like, oh, let's go through that person's till, because they're always like nice. And it's like you're buying groceries, but you're just having a good experience with this person.
Mhm.
And it's like kind of like, experience is everything. Like I know I'm going to go to Choices anyways, but I'd rather go see that person than like that grumpy jerk over there. So I went to Cartems, and this person was there, and they remembered me, and I'm just like some rando person. Like, hey, how's it going? Oh, what are you doing downtown? Da, 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 da. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking that wasn't weird for Cartems. Like I
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, this is like on brand. This makes sense to me. So rather than being somewhere else where I'm like, wow, this person who's ringing me through is like really nice. How odd. Instead, I was like, oh yeah, this person works at Cartems. That makes sense to me. So
Yeah.
you're doing something right around that, like probably lots of things right around that. Because I'd say the donut is like the thing that you give yourself either as a reward or like some fun little thing you do, or you're kind of like trying to steel yourself up for this next thing. You're like, oh God, I have to have this meeting.
Mhm.
It, it's something for you in that day, even if it's just like a cool little snack, but the experience is what's going to make it really cool. Like that's it. And I think you've hit on it.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about partnership and growing a business that has partners?
Yeah.
All right. So how many partners are in the business now?
3.
How have you maintained those relationships because you're quite a bit bigger now than you were when you started?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so as it stands right now, we have 3 people, but there are, to be clear, there are 3 other people that have given so much that we want to bring them in. But officially, it says we have 3 partners, but I would actually say it's more like 6. But how have I? The question was, how have I like maintained or handled those relationships?
Yeah, well, how not just you, how have all of you made that work? Because like 2 people, let alone 3 people, let alone 6 people, that's like
Yeah,
tough.
yeah. So to be perfectly honest with you, it's not all roses. It's really hard, and that kind of goes back to my point about making sure you've got all your like documents in place. Um, yeah, it's strenuous, it's stressful. I think that again, communication is key when you've got that many people doing things. Somebody that used to be with the company who is not a partner, but we sort of lost a lot of our friendship over business. And so with those that are still within the company, the biggest thing is making sure we're all on board with what's happening and we're all moving forward together, and then also we're just checking in with one another, making sure everything is okay. And if it's not okay, that's also okay, because we're not going to agree on everything. And when we don't agree, we typically do sort of fall back on like follow your heart and like what's the right thing to do here, which is how we will typically end up making a decision if it comes down to it. We've never like we've never had to like vote on anything. But it's hard. It's hard. I mean, you're always going to have disagreements. Um, and as long as you can get through those, and one thing I say to Rags all the time is like, I love you, and that goes a long way. That all of these disagreements should never take the place of the things that we've all done together.
I love that, man. It for me. So again, myself, Spencer, who's on here, and Patrick, we all grew up playing in bands. We all play in bands still. And playing in a band is weird because like you're in this creative process. You're supposed to be like the best of friends. Like people often say, like, I get to travel the world or play shows with my best friends. But then behind the scenes, it's like, fuck you. Like
Yeah.
get your dirty socks out of the band. And
Yeah.
it's a real as you get older, you get better at it typically of how to be in a band. But so much of it has to do with like surround yourself with the right people and really know that the value of your relationship is absolutely congruent to like the health of the business. And if you can't
Mhm.
maintain a good relationship, you're gonna have a shitty business, just like you're gonna have a shitty band.
Yeah.
So I love that you've got that focus. So where's Cartems today? What's up with Cartems today?
So we need to find a new home for the Pender shop. That building is being torn down.
Oh, it breaks
Yeah, I
my
know.
heart.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. So we're sort of in a scramble of trying to find a new home and trying to figure out where that's going to be, and what that will all look like. we're not going to make donuts downtown, because it would just be prohibitively expensive to make them there. But so it's find a home for the kitchen, but also find a home for downtown, like for the people that are there, and for the people that eventually are going to start also coming back to work. And so it's that. It's also, the pandemic's been hard for everybody, and so, looking, all of us, at what is like the next big step, because this move that we're having to do is not by choice. It's we're being forced to move, and that's fine. But we need to collectively discuss what's the next move that we want to do. My initial goal with this whole thing was always I wanted to be across Canada. But that's hard. And running 3 shops is hard. And I will say that, when we did have 3 shops and we had a food truck as well, I don't know if this is true for all businesses in all instances, because obviously brick and mortar is different, but having 2 is manageable, and was manageable with the amount of people that we had. But when we had that 3rd shop and a food truck, there ended up being like, it became like, it's not like, at a shop and it's exactly this much more difficult. It really got like a lot more difficult. And so I think if we were to go look into expanding again, I would say it would be more of a move where, we're going to open a few shops, where, and we've got the right people at the right capacity doing things that need to get done. It's difficult I think 3 is a tough number for our business in particular, because you've got a lot of people, but I don't know if everybody's time was being utilized the right way. And I think that actually adding a shop might have actually helped things. But we have to have a discussion about if we even want to do that, if we want to go back into the fire and open a bunch of shops, and push on the original idea of going across Canada. I wanted, whoever works at Tim Hortons, I wanted them to have a meeting and talk about us, because we were getting big enough that we actually would be mentioned in their meeting. So but I to be honest with you, these last few years have been really, really tough, for myself, for the business, for everybody. And so the initial immediate goal is, we need to find a kitchen, we need to find a home for downtown, and then I think from there we're going to sort of reassess and figure out what the next best step for us is.
Yeah, I love the idea that maybe you don't do that. And I also love the idea that maybe you do it. Like, one of the things that I try and caution people about, it's not always about the next role or the next destination, or like the next, for your case, the next like place where we're going to open. Sometimes it's just about, hey, let's solidify what we have. Let's just enjoy it. It's what I call the sweet water. Like, if you can just swim in the sweet water for a while and just enjoy what you've built. And also sometimes it's like, hell yeah, I want to take on the next challenge. We live in such a interesting society, in the sense of, it's like, we're always thinking you got to do the next thing. Well, what if the next thing was just enjoying what you've got?
Yeah. Or also, I would add, we don't necessarily have to open another brick and mortar to expand. There's other things that we can do. We've been working quite diligently. We've been trying to actually get vegan donuts into the freezer section, so that people can eat donuts at home.
So you're trying to ruin my life, is what you're saying. Yeah. I salute you.
Now you just have them like, in your freezer and easy access. But
it's the best and the worst.
Yeah. We have a vegan gluten-free dry mix as well. And like, those are things that, we could invest more time and energy in. I'm very excited about the vegan frozen donuts. It's so close, but not quite there yet. But those are the types of things that we can do to expand and to be a part of people's lives without necessarily, doing the brick and mortar thing. And I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think the next number of years are going to be quite challenging, particularly for small business where, we don't have deep pockets. We can't weather storms the way that a large corporation can. And so, we have to be mindful of that as well. And things like the environment affect what we do, greatly. and where our inputs are coming from. And so there are a lot of things to think about and things to consider. And, going back to the sort of expansion without brick and mortar, there's like, those are the kinds of things that also excite me, because it's hard to run brick and mortar shops, and it's very expensive. And if we can find our way into people's homes in other ways, that's great.
Okay, so as we're closing off, I got 3 questions for you, and they're going to scale up in difficulty.
Okay.
All right. So what's next for you personally?
Oh, what's next for me? I mean, aside from running the business from afar, which has been going well, I'm also looking at where I can find some additional work. I really like being a part of startups and businesses that are growing, and so I've been trying to find a way for me to work alongside a company, but not be the leader of the company. So that's really on my radar, is like joining another growing company, and being able to do that from here. I've got 2 boys, and we live in a small town, so commuting to work is not a thing. So I need to find remote additional work. Aside from that, I'm trying to keep myself healthy, trying to run. As much as I dislike running, I do it anyways.
All right. Top 3 Cartems donuts, like your go-to top 3.
Okay.
And then there's going to be an adjunct question. Top 3 non-Cartems donuts. So other shops, other places that you've been to. So let's start with Cartems. Top 3 Cartems.
Apple fritter. Number 1, apple fritter. It's not even close. To the point where I got to think about it. Like, that's how much I love the apple fritter.
I know, it was like, I wasn't even finished saying, you're like, apple fritter. By the way, your apple fritter is like top notch, because apple fritters can suck, but yours is top notch. Maybe the best I've ever had.
It's a tough donut to make. And moreover, people, like, when you say apple fritter, it can come in a variety of different ways. It doesn't always look the same. There's so much. Are people actually buying apples and peeling them and cutting them, or are they just buying a bag of, you can get like fritter, the makings of the fritter stuff in a bag, which we do not do.
We would call that an apple shitter.
Yes, the apple shitter. That's good. I've never heard that. Okay, my second. We used to do a white chocolate coconut donut. So it was a white chocolate ganache, and then coconut shavings on top on a chocolate dough. That was up there for me. And then I think for my third, I'm racking my brain to think of. We've done so many good specials that are like just really have knocked my socks off. But I'm going to go with the. I'm wavering between the smoked maple walnut and the citrus, because I really like the smoked maple walnut.
Those are my 2 faves.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go smoked maple walnut, because it's very unique. It is exactly what we say it is. And I also find it's quite polarizing. Like, a lot of people will get it and be like, they'll be like, first of all, they'll say, is there meat in here? We assure them there is not. But it's very polarizing, and some people, and we get it, and like, we'll always say, look, try it. If you don't like it, just come back. We'll give you something else. But people sometimes are like, whoa, this is unbelievable. And some people are like, this is just not for me. And that's totally okay. 3 donuts elsewhere. So I'm a huge cruller person. I love honey crullers. And so I'm going to put at the top of the list, original, made at the shop, Tim Hortons honey crullers from back in the day. That was a really, really great donut for me. There's a shop in New York called Dough. I believe that's the name. And they were the best donuts I had in New York. And it wasn't one particular donut. It was the dough was very, very good. And so I would basically just say anything from Dough is on that list. And my third, okay, yeah, actually I have it. It's a Lee's donut. It's just the Lee's honey glaze, straight up, especially when it's warm and it like almost dissolves in your mouth. And they are the quintessential OG classic donut. You know, they're doing something right there. And so I would say the OG Lee's honey, just the straight glazed donut is my other favorite.
Okay. These are incredible answers. The last one I've got for you: if pineapple on pizza is like the hotly debated issue with in the pizza world, what would be the equivalent in the donut world?
My initial thought is, and I'm not sure that this is, I mean, I might change my answer, but I'm going to say, so, I mean, you know, putting anything savory inside a donut or on top of a donut, I think is something that, you know, and we've done like pulled pork and donuts and all kinds of weird stuff. And I think that it's fair to debate that. I would also, one thing that doesn't come up a lot that I think I just don't think it's a donut anymore is if you cut a donut in half, I think at that point it's something else. And I'm just, and this is very subjective, I think, but for me, you know, a sliced donut and then things in the middle is not, you know, you're not making donuts anymore.
Yeah. Do not do that.
Do not do that. Yeah.
Come on, man. You're too straight faced. Like, this guy's an idiot. All right.
Yeah, you know what? It's like that one, like, it really like it grinds my gears because it's like, no, you don't cut it. If you can stuff it, like by all means, put something inside, but don't cut it all the way in half and call it a donut. It's not a donut anymore.
It's weird. It's like a banana split of donuts.
Yeah.
You don't want to mess with that. All right, my man. No. As we are closing off, anything you want to say, anything you want to plug, anything you want to ask?
No, I mean, I the only thing I want to say is that I'm forever grateful for all the people that have ever, you know, been a part of this journey. It still humbles me to this day that anybody would want to actually help along with this. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm also, you know, super grateful for all of the ups and downs and like the peaks and the serious valleys that, you know, running a business affords you. And I'll say something that somebody that was a customer that became a friend said to me one time, and it's always stuck with me. So she came in and she said, "How are you doing, Jordan?" And I said, you know, I don't remember exactly why, but I was explaining why I'm very stressed out and why things are very difficult at the time. And she said, "You should be thankful." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because most people typically by choice live their lives in, you know, if this is the emotional spectrum, right? And these are the extremes, people usually are in here for their whole lives. Like they don't really go." And she said, "You should be thankful for the fact that the experiences you get run the gamut from really, really high to really, really low. And that's something that a lot of people may never get to experience in their entire life. And so be thankful for at this moment, you know, being down, because it's also going to result in big highs as well." And so I've always thought about that when things are tough, that, you know, sometimes some people don't even go there.
Totally. I love that, man. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. So any last words as we're closing off?
That's it. Thanks for having me. I've had a great time.
Awesome, man. Everyone check out Cartems Donuts. It's Cartems Donuts.
But if you say Cartems, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. We don't need to be sticklers here. Patrick, your pronunciation, although incorrect, is totally welcome. Are we right?
Yeah, absolutely. Open arms.
Open arms. I love it. All right, everyone. We'll see you in the outro. And Spencer, drop the beat.